36 years after a great war ended, a city vanished beneath the sea. Not slowly, not gradually, it was swallowed in a single night. The ancient texts say the ocean rose and consumed it entirely. Buildings, streets, towers, temples, gone. All of it erased by water so completely that for thousands of years, people debated whether it ever existed at all. But here's what no one expected. In 1983, marine archaeologists diving off the coast of western India found something extraordinary beneath the waves. Massive stone structures, perfectly shaped anchors, pottery shards, and the ruins of what appeared to be ancient walls stretching across the seafloor. What they may have found is Dwarka, a city described in ancient Indian texts as the most magnificent kingdom ever built, a city of gold and crystal towers, a city built not by ordinary men, but said to have been designed by the divine architect of the gods himself. And according to those same texts, a city that was the capital of one of the most iconic figures in all of human history, Lord Krishna. So the question is this: is Dwarka real? Was an actual city swallowed by the sea thousands of years ago? And if so, what does that mean for everything we think we know about ancient civilization? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, the answer is going to be far more complicated and far more astonishing than you're expecting. Let's start with what we know. Near the western tip of Gujarat, on India's Arabian Sea coast, lies Okha, Gulf of Kutch, a region long associated with the legendary kingdom of Dwarka. Today, the modern city of Dwarka sits right at the edge of the sea, with a famous temple dedicated to Krishna standing on the shoreline, waves crashing at its base, as if the ocean is still trying to finish what it started millennia ago. This place has been considered sacred for thousands of years. Pilgrims travel from across India to visit it. The Hindu tradition holds that this is the very spot where Krishna himself established his kingdom, where he ruled, where he loved, and eventually where the sea took back everything. For centuries, this was treated as mythology, beautiful, but mythology nonetheless. But historians kept noticing something strange. The texts describing Dwarka were extraordinarily specific, not vague metaphors, not symbolic imagery, specific architectural details, specific dimensions, specific locations. The kind of detail that usually only appears in accounts of real places. And then, the divers went underwater. What they brought back changed the conversation forever. But before we get to what's beneath the waves, we need to understand who Krishna was, why Dwarka was built, and what the ancient world said this city actually looked like. Because once you hear the description, the underwater ruins are going to hit very differently. Who was Lord Krishna? This is a question that has occupied philosophers, historians, theologians, and scholars for centuries, and the answer depends enormously on who you ask. To hundreds of millions of Hindus worldwide, Krishna is a supreme deity, one of the most beloved incarnations of Lord Vishnu, the preserver of the universe. His life, his teachings, his love, all of it recorded in texts that formed the spiritual backbone of one of the world's oldest living religions. To historians, Krishna occupies a fascinating middle ground, a figure whose life story is so detailed, so geographically specific, and so interwoven with verifiable historical events that many scholars believe there was a real historical person at the center of it all. A king, a warrior, a philosopher, around whom a vast spiritual tradition grew. The texts that describe his life are among the oldest literary works in human history. The Mahabharata, one of the two great Sanskrit epics, is nearly 10 times longer than the Iliad and the Odyssey combined. It describes a massive war, a real dynasty, real kingdoms, real geography. Krishna is woven through all of it, not as an observer, but as one of the central figures driving the course of events. And one of those events is the founding of Dwarka. Krishna was born in Mathura, a city in northern India that exists to this day. His biological parents were Vasudeva and Devaki.
Do not be afraid, my love.
Your peace is a lie.
But to save him from certain death, he was secretly carried across the Yamuna River and raised by Nanda and Yashoda in the village of Gokul. And so began a lifelong conflict between a king who wanted to erase a child from existence and a child destined to change history. By the time Krishna was a young man, he had defeated Kansa and taken his rightful place among his people. But Mathura's troubles weren't over. A powerful king named Jarasandha, Kansa's father-in-law, launched invasion after invasion against the city, seeking revenge. 17 times, according to the texts, 17 battles. But here's where the story takes a turn that historians find genuinely fascinating. Rather than fight an 18th battle in Mathura, with all the death and destruction that would bring, Krishna made a tactical decision that the texts describe in remarkable detail. He decided to relocate his entire people. He was going to build a new city, a new capital, on the far western edge of the Indian subcontinent, on a peninsula jutting into the Arabian Sea, far from Jarasandha's reach. And the city he built there was going to be unlike anything the world had ever seen. The texts call it Dwarka, or Dwarka. The name means gateway, specifically gateway to heaven. And according to those texts, building it required divine intervention. Krishna purportedly called upon Vishwakarma, the celestial architect of the gods, the being described in Hindu cosmology as the designer of the heavens themselves, the one who built the flying vehicles of the gods, the weapons of the devas, the palaces of celestial realms. The Vishnu Purana, one of the 18 major ancient Sanskrit texts, describes what Vishwakarma created in remarkable detail. The city was built on 12 yojanas of land reclaimed from the sea itself, the ocean, according to the text, retreating to make room for the kingdom. It was divided into 6 sectors. There were wide roads, grand intersections, and beautiful gardens. There were palaces made of gold and precious gems, towers that caught the light and gleamed across the water. There were marketplaces filled with merchants from distant lands. According to local traditions, Lord Krishna's residence was located on what is now known as Bet Dwarka, an island near present-day Oka. Bet Dwarka is also revered as the place where Krishna met his childhood friend Sudama in the famous Krishna-Sudama reunion. Tradition holds that while Krishna ruled his kingdom from Dwarka on the mainland, he resided at Bet Dwarka and traveled between the two locations, carrying out the responsibilities of governance while maintaining his royal household on the island. The Mahabharata describes Dwarka having massive gates flanked by towers, beautiful suburbs stretching outward from the city center, paved roads, buildings set in orderly rows, granaries and assembly halls. It mentions the city was protected by walls, that it had a magnificent harbor, that ships from distant kingdoms came and went. The Harivamsa, an appendix to the Mahabharata dedicated specifically to Krishna's life, adds even more vivid detail. It describes jewel-studded gateways, palaces as white as clouds, golden spires, and streets so clean and well-maintained they shone like polished mirrors. Now, pause for a moment and notice something important. Ancient mythological texts often describe fantastical cities, floating cities, cities in the sky, cities made entirely of light. That's common across world mythologies. But Dwarka is described differently. The detail is architectural, structural. The texts mention not just that it was beautiful, but how it was organized: sectors, roads, gates, harbors, walls. These are the kinds of details that appear in accounts of places that actually existed. That detail is exactly what brought archaeologists to the coast of Gujarat. But here's where the story gets darker. Because, according to those same texts, Dwarka was built to last forever. And it didn't. The Mahabharata isn't just a story about war. It's a story about the end of an age. The Great Kurukshetra War, the climactic 18-day battle at the heart of the epic, was fought between two branches of the same royal family, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. Krishna served as the charioteer and advisor to the Pandava hero Arjuna, and the battlefield dialogue between them became one of the most sacred texts in human history, the Bhagavad Gita. Pandavas won. But winning came at a cost almost incomprehensible in scope. The texts describe virtually all of the great warrior families of the age being destroyed, millions dead, entire lineages wiped out in 18 days of relentless battle. And then the curse came. A grieving mother named Gandhari, whose 100 sons had all been killed in the war, turned her eyes on Krishna and blamed him. She believed he could have stopped the war. She believed he chose not to.
You could have stopped this war, yet you did nothing. I curse you, Krishna. You too shall witness the destruction of your race.
Her curse was devastating. 36 years after Kurukshetra ended, Krishna's own people, the Yadavas, would destroy each other. His entire clan would tear itself apart, and Krishna himself would die, not in battle, not with glory, but quietly, alone, in a forest. The texts say it happened exactly as she said. 36 years after Kurukshetra, the Yadavas fell into a drunken brawl during a festival. What started as an argument escalated into a massacre. The men of Dwarka turned on each other. Great warriors killed their own brothers. By the time it was over, almost the entire Yadava clan was dead. Krishna survived the night, but not long. He went into the forest to meditate. And there, a hunter named Jada, mistaking Krishna's foot peeking out from under the trees for a deer, shot an arrow. The arrow struck Krishna's heel, the only vulnerable point on his body, and Krishna died. Shortly after, the texts say, the ocean reclaimed Dwarka. The sea rose. The magnificent city, with all its golden towers and jeweled gates, disappeared beneath the waves. And the Harivamsa records this moment with heartbreaking specificity. The sea, which had been beating against the shores, suddenly broke the boundary that was imposed on it by nature. The sea rushed into the city. It coursed through the streets of the beautiful city. The sea covered up everything in the city. For thousands of years, that was where the story ended. A beautiful legend, a lost kingdom, a city beneath the sea that no one would ever find. Then came 1983.
The Archaeological Survey of India,
the government body responsible for the nation's archaeological heritage, launched a marine archaeology unit in 1981. It was one of the first such dedicated programs in Asia. And almost immediately, their focus turned to the waters off the coast of Dwarka. The logic was straightforward. The text placed the ancient city here. The geography matched. If there was anything to find, this is where you'd look. What they found on their first serious surveys stopped them cold. On the sea floor, at depths ranging from roughly 6 to 12 meters, the divers discovered stone structures. Not scattered rocks, not natural formations. Structures, walls, regularly shaped stones, architectural layouts. The finds were significant enough to prompt a more systematic excavation, and over the following years, especially during a major underwater excavation campaign in the late 1980s and into the 1990s, led by Dr. S.R. Rao, the picture that emerged was extraordinary. Let me walk you through what they actually found. The most striking artifacts were the stone anchors, dozens of them, scattered across the sea floor. Now, anchors themselves aren't unusual in underwater archaeology, but these anchors were distinctive. They were of a type known as stockless anchors, triangular, with a single hole at the top for the rope. And they were very, very old. Dr. Rao identified them as belonging to what he called the late Harappan period, relating to the Indus Valley Civilization, one of the ancient world's great urban cultures, which flourished in roughly 3000 to 1500 BCE. If those dates are correct, these anchors are somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 years old. But there's more. The excavations also turned up pottery, significant amounts of it. Pottery is one of the most reliable dating tools archaeologists have. Different periods produce distinct styles, materials, and techniques. The pottery recovered from the Dwarka site was analyzed and dated to multiple periods, some of it consistent with the late Harappan era, some of it with later periods. Intriguingly, seals were also found, small stone seals bearing inscriptions and symbols. One of the most significant finds was a 3-sided seal inscribed with symbols, a bull, a unicorn, and the goat, that bears a striking resemblance to seals found at Harappan sites on land, the kind of seal that would have been used by merchants or officials to mark ownership or authenticate documents. The kind of seal that tells you a sophisticated, literate, organized society was here. And then there were the structural finds themselves. The divers mapped out what appeared to be walls, both running parallel to the shore and perpendicular to it, suggesting a planned gridded layout. They found what appeared to be bastions, fortification features, the kind of features you'd expect in a protected harbor city. Dr. Rao, who spent years on these excavations and published his findings in a book titled The Lost City of Dwarka, argued that the evidence was compelling. There had been a real, sophisticated city here, and the sea had consumed it. Consistent, he believed, with the descriptions in the ancient texts. The conclusion he drew was bold. Dwarka was real. Now, here is where we have to be honest with you, because any serious examination of this topic has to include the full picture. The scientific and archaeological community's response to Rao's conclusions has been complex. Some researchers were impressed. The artifacts were real. The structures were real. The anchors were real. Nobody disputed that something significant had been found. What was disputed was the interpretation. Critics pointed out that the dating evidence, while genuinely ancient, was not conclusive proof that this was the Dwarka of the texts. The Mahabharata's historical dating itself is deeply contested. Scholars have placed the events described in the epic anywhere from 3000 BCE to 900 BCE, with no definitive consensus. Some scholars argue the texts were compiled much later than the events they describe, making them unreliable as historical sources for archaeology. There were also questions about the structures themselves. Were the walls really walls, or could they be natural geological formations? Without more extensive excavation and more precise dating, it was difficult to be certain. The site was also difficult to work in. The waters off Dwarka are turbulent, visibility is limited, the depth makes extensive excavation challenging, and the work has been intermittent, hampered by funding, logistics, and the sheer difficulty of underwater archaeology in that environment. Independent verification of all the finds has been limited, which is a frustration for researchers who want to take the discovery seriously. And yet, the dismissals haven't been entirely satisfying either. Because the artifacts are real, the structures are real, and they are old, nobody has offered a compelling alternative explanation for how late Harappan-era anchors and seals ended up on the seafloor off the coast of exactly the place the ancient text identified as Dwarka. The debate isn't settled, and that's actually the honest and important thing to say here. This is not a case of archaeologists finding Atlantis and the scientific establishment refusing to believe it. It's a genuine, ongoing, unresolved question, which is far more interesting than either extreme. But the story of underwater discoveries in this part of India doesn't stop at Dwarka. In January 2002, the Indian National Institute of Ocean Technology was conducting a routine sonar survey in the Gulf of Kutch, the same body of water, further inland, when their equipment detected something that had no business being where it was. At a depth of about 40 meters, roughly 5 miles offshore, the sonar images showed what appeared to be geometric structures, regular, grid-like patterns, the kind of shapes that don't occur naturally on the ocean floor. They sent divers down. What they recovered was startling. Artifacts, including pottery, pieces of wood, a human tooth, and what appeared to be wall-like structures were brought to the surface. The human tooth was submitted for carbon dating. The results, announced in early 2002, caused an immediate sensation. The tooth was dated to approximately 9,500 years old. If that dating was accurate, and that's a very important if, the structures beneath the Gulf of Kutch would predate every known ancient civilization on Earth. They would be older than Mesopotamia, older than ancient Egypt, older than anything we currently consider the beginning of urban human civilization. Some researchers immediately suggested this could be related to Dwarka, or even an older antecedent of it, a city swallowed by the sea when ocean levels rose sharply after the last ice age. The announcement made headlines worldwide, and the controversy that followed was fierce. Many archaeologists and oceanographers expressed serious skepticism. The methodology of the survey was questioned. The structures, some argued, could be natural geological formations that had been misinterpreted by sonar, a known pitfall in underwater surveying. The sample used for carbon dating may not have been reliably connected to the structures themselves. A single tooth, without confirmed stratigraphic context, cannot reliably date a site. The site has not been conclusively re-excavated or definitively confirmed by independent researchers. As of today, it remains deeply controversial, neither confirmed nor fully dismissed. But it opened a door that's very difficult to close. Because here is a geologically established fact. At the end of the last ice age, roughly 10 to 12,000 years ago, global sea levels were dramatically lower than they are today. Much of the continental shelf that is now underwater was dry land. And when the glaciers melted, the seas rose, slowly at first, then more rapidly, swallowing coastal lowlands around the world. In the Persian Gulf, in the North Sea, in the Mediterranean, and yes, in the Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Kutch. Whatever communities existed on those coastlines before the sea rose, their remains are now underwater. Whether the Gulf of Kutch structures are one of those communities, or whether there's something else entirely, is the question archaeologists are still working to answer. Here is the piece of all this. The Mahabharata contains a passage, one that scholars have known about for a very long time, in which a character named Arjuna, after Krishna's death, stands at the edge of the sea and watches as it consumes Dwarka. He watches the towers disappear. He watches the streets where he walked, the temples where he prayed, the city that was his friend's kingdom, erased by the water. The passage is elegiac, heartbreaking, written with the weight of someone comparatively analytical. Most ancient mythological descriptions of lost cities are vague. But consider this. Now, was it written by someone who actually saw this? We can't know that. Now, was it written by someone who actually saw this? We can't know that. But consider this. Comparatively analytical, most ancient mythological descriptions of lost cities are vague. Atlantis, as described by Plato, is geographically imprecise and written approximately 900 years after the events supposedly occurred. The Mahabharata's description of Dwarka's submersion is geographically precise, architecturally detailed, and appears in a text that was being compiled while the city it describes was still, according to the timeline of the epic itself, a living memory. And the city it describes is exactly where archaeologists found ruins underwater. In no other case in the ancient world does an archaeological discovery so precisely match a specific location named in a specific ancient text, with specific descriptions of structures, and the specific claim that the sea swallowed it. That alignment does not prove the mythology is literal history, but it demands serious attention. There is another thread that makes this even more tangled and fascinating. Emphasis: astronomical dating. Embedded within the Mahabharata are detailed astronomical observations, descriptions of planetary positions, eclipses, and celestial configurations tied to specific events in the story. For decades, researchers have attempted to use these descriptions as a way to pin down when the events of the Mahabharata actually occurred. Using modern astronomical software that can calculate planetary positions backward through time, some researchers have proposed dates for the Kurukshetra War ranging from around 3067 BCE to as recently as 1300 BCE. The most widely cited calculation among those who take this approach places the war at approximately 3067 BCE, which would mean Dwarka was submerged around 3031 BCE. Interestingly, that range overlaps with the late Harappan period that Dr. Rao associated with the Dwarka artifacts. Is that a coincidence? A confirmation? An overreach? Scholars disagree sharply, and none of this is settled science. But the convergence of independent lines of evidence, textual, archaeological, astronomical, and geological, is the reason this mystery refuses to stay quietly in the realm of mythology. There is one more dimension of the story that doesn't get enough attention. Dwarka today is not just an archaeological site. It is one of the 4 sacred dhams, the holiest pilgrimage sites in Hinduism. Along with Badrinath, Puri, and Rameshwaram, Dwarka forms the sacred geography of an entire religious tradition. Tens of thousands of pilgrims visit every year. The Dwarkadish temple, dedicated to Krishna as the Lord of Dwarka, has stood in various forms at this site for centuries, rebuilt multiple times as invaders destroyed it and devotees rebuilt it. The current temple structure, towering over the sea, dates to the 16th century, but the site itself has been continuously held sacred far longer than that. This creates a layer of complexity that purely academic treatment sometimes misses. For millions of people, Dwarka is not a hypothesis to be tested. It is not an archaeological question mark. It is a living reality of faith. The city may be underwater, but Krishna's presence at that spot is not a matter of evidence for them. It is a matter of direct spiritual experience. And here is something worth sitting with. The history of archaeology is full of cases where religious or legendary traditions preserved accurate geographical memories of real places for thousands of years, long before archaeology confirmed them. Troy. The ancient city of Troy, described in Homer's Iliad and long dismissed as legend, was discovered in western Turkey in the 1870s, exactly where the ancient texts had placed it. Jericho. The walls of Jericho, whose destruction is described in the Hebrew Bible, are among the most extensively studied ancient fortifications ever found. Göbekli Tepe, a temple complex in Turkey dating back 12,000 years, thousands of years older than anything scholars had expected, completely rewriting the timeline of human civilization. Each of these finds came with skepticism before they came with confirmation. The pattern is consistent. Legends preserve real memories. Not perfectly, not without embellishment, but the kernel of geographic, cultural, and historical truth persists across thousands of years of storytelling. Dwarka fits this pattern. So let's lay out what we actually know versus what we're still trying to understand. What we know. Ancient stone structures exist on the seafloor off the coast of modern Dwarka, in the Gulf of Kutch area. These structures include walls, bastions, and a harbor layout. Artifacts recovered from the site, including anchors, pottery, and inscribed seals, date to the late Harappan period, roughly 2000 to 4000 BCE. The geological record confirms that this area was dry land in earlier millennia, and was gradually submerged as sea levels rose. What we know. One of the oldest and most detailed literary traditions in the world places a major city called Dwarka at exactly this geographic location. That text describes architectural features, walls, gates, a harbor, consistent with what archaeologists found underwater. The same text specifically states the city was swallowed by the sea. What we're still trying to understand. Whether the underwater structures represent the city described in the text, or an older settlement from a different era, or a combination of both. Whether the dates of the artifacts match the timeline implied by the Mahabharata. Whether the Gulf of Kutch structures found in 2002 represent an even older settlement, or a natural formation misread by sonar. What a fully funded, modern, systematic excavation of both sites would reveal. And here is the hardest question of all, the one that lies underneath every other question in this video. If Dwarka is real, if archaeologists are standing on the ruins of an actual ancient city that matches the descriptions in texts thousands of years old, what does that mean for everything else in those texts? The Mahabharata describes a war of unprecedented scale. It names kingdoms and kings and their geographic locations. It describes weapons of terrible power. It records dialogues that have shaped human philosophy for millennia. If the city is real, how much of the rest of it is real? It's the question that archaeologists, historians, theologians, and millions of ordinary people are sitting with. And it's a question that the ocean, stubbornly, beautifully, silently, is not yet ready to answer. 36 years after the war. That's what the ancient texts say. And off the coast of Gujarat, at the bottom of the Arabian Sea, something ancient and stone and old is waiting to be understood. Maybe it's the city of Krishna. Maybe it's something else entirely. Something even older. Something that rewrites our understanding of when and where human civilization began. Maybe it's both. Maybe the answers, when they finally come, will be stranger and more astonishing than either the believers or the skeptics are currently prepared for. What's certain is this: the ocean is deep, and history is deeper. We have only been looking seriously for a few decades. With better technology, better funding, better methods, the seafloor off the coast of India may yet give up its secrets. And when it does, every history book in the world may need to be rewritten. The city is down there. Whether it's the kingdom of Krishna, or the ruins of a civilization we haven't named yet, or something our current frameworks of history can't quite hold, something is down there, and it's waiting.